For me personally, I'm doing it for fun. These are basically the cards that I wish I could have collected like a long time ago, but now I am collecting them. And even though they do cost quite a bit more compared to like back in the day, for me it's worth it and it's a nice hobby to have.
What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Cards. I'm your host, Zhan Morning. You can check me out all over social platforms at Zhan Morning. Today I've got an interview with Joseph Reynolds. Joseph has a very popular gaming YouTube channel, the Gaming Palooza Empire. But not only is he a fan of video games, he is a huge fan of professional wrestling cards. We cover a lot of ground on this interview. We talked to Joseph about how he got into professional wrestling, how he got into wrestling cards, and if there is any crossover between video games, wrestling, video game collectors, wrestling card collectors. We also talk about the wrestling card project that he started on his YouTube channel, Superstars on Cards, which is a wrestling card focused video series that's a collaboration series on his channel featuring yours truly. And before we get into our conversation, just a few reminders of how you can help support my content. Please hit that subscribe button, it takes 2 seconds. Give me a thumbs up if you're digging wrestling cards. Share it with a friend. Let's get more people involved in wrestling cards. I've also got 2 other wrestling card platforms I'm part of in audio form. Wrestling with Cards, that's right, the same name as this show in audio form. Talk about some different stuff than I do here. Some of the same. You're going to want to check that out. As well as Worlds Collide, myself and Tony Vella from WrestlingTradingCards.com. We get together to discuss different kinds of topics in wrestling cards. So 2 other audio platforms you can check out my content. Please subscribe and share those as well. And lastly, links below if you want to join my Patreon, if you want to check me out on social media, all those links are down there. My Spotify, you guys know I love to check out awesome new music. Always putting cool stuff and playlists up there, so follow on there as well. And links to buying me a coffee. I gotta stay caffeinated. Thank you. What's up, wrestling fans? We've got Joseph Reynolds on the show today. Welcome, buddy.
How's it going, man?
I am doing great. Glad to finally get you on, as we've been working a lot together on the Superstars on Card series. We'll get to that in one moment. But for anybody unfamiliar with you or your channel, why don't you give us just a brief introduction and your background?
All right, so my background, as far as my YouTube channel, is Gaming Palooza Empire, so you guys might be more familiar with me making retro gaming content. But as of recently, I started making Superstars on Card videos with Zhan Morning and the Wrestle Vessel. Now we've been doing a pretty awesome project showing off retro wrestling cards and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's been really kicking off to a nice start. Yeah, I think it's actually turned out quite well.
I agree. I've gotten pretty good feedback on it, and you're doing most of the heavy lifting, so I'll give kudos to you on the idea. And like I said, we'll talk about that in 1 minute, but just, I guess, a little bit of a background on your wrestling fandom. How did you get into wrestling in the first place?
All right, so as far as my wrestling background goes, wrestling is literally the first thing I watched on TV, according to my mother. I was born back in '86. So according to my mother, the first thing that she showed me on TV was World Wrestling Federation back in '86. And ever since then, my father always watched wrestling back then. He has a lineage going back a long time ago watching wrestling, all the way to like the Bruno Sammartino days.
Nice.
So for me, even though I was only a year old, my father had a Coliseum video collection, and one of the first memories I have is WrestleMania 3, even though I was only a year old. I visibly, and I still have the tape over there in the closet, visibly remember like most of the matches from WrestleMania 3, the Pontiac Silverdome, all that stuff. And I was definitely heavily into wrestling from there on, going all the way into the 90s until now. Of course, I love AEW right now. So AEW is doing a great job with their products.
So real quick, actually, you bring up a good topic. I see your shirt. A lot of guests I've had on either talk about AEW or they have AEW shirts on. Like, we're seeing a lot of like fandom coming up behind AEW. Like, what's your thoughts on just the current state of wrestling between AEW, WWE, Indies?
Well, as far as AEW and WWE goes, I'm going to be honest with you. WWE is going through a huge shift in their management department, I guess. Like
Yeah.
a lot of they're having a huge shift with a lot of employees coming and going. I don't know exactly what's going on with WWE. I love WWE still. I watch it every Monday. I have a huge issue with the way they book wrestlers. I have a huge issue with some of their storylines. Um, it's no secret to anyone that they're not as nearly as good as they used to be. Uh, I won't trash WWE, but I think there's so much room for improvements in WWE right now that I don't want to say that they're a sinking ship, but if they keep going the way they're going, losing viewership and going down the road that they're going, where they're not giving us a decent product in some cases, it's not going to be looking good for them. On the other side of the grass, you have AEW. AEW has a relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling, Impact Wrestling. They might be having a relationship with MLW also. NWA.
Sure.
They're literally a great wrestling company, and they've only been around for like maybe a year, and that's basically what a lot of people want. Just a lot of people that are tuning into this new wrestling promotion, and they're delivering a good product. They have a long ways to go though. So
Right.
WWE is like up here, AEW is right here right now. AEW is making their way up to their level, but the problem with WWE is WWE's falling down. They're not where they used to be honest. As far as the indies go, the indies is still thriving in my opinion. I think that AEW actually helps them thrive because a lot of the wrestlers can still go to indie events and stuff like that with no issues.
Yeah, and actually, you bring up a really good segue here. For me, I like all wrestling, no matter if it's like crappy comedy wrestling or like super realistic, storyline driven wrestling, like old NWA days. I like all that stuff. It's something for everybody. I'm not one of those people who like, oh, I only watch this type of wrestling because I'm a huge deathmatch fan, and I know like tons of people hate that stuff. But it's interesting because like you're exactly right on WWE. I'm not as big of a fan of the wrestlers and the booking and that sort of thing. But because of their cards and their characters, even though they're not booked very well, I'm still interested in a lot of them. And really, since they're the primary producer with tops of wrestling cards, that keeps me entertained in that aspect. And then you mentioned the indies, and we're seeing a lot of fandom in the indie sets that are limited runs, hard to get a hold of. You can pretty much only get them at shows or if you get them online. So perfect segue, wrapping all this up. How did you get into wrestling cards?
Well, wrestling cards going back probably in the 90s, probably 9, 10 years old. I remember having World Wrestling Federation magazines that actually had the cards inside.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably around the time where I started collecting those cards. And of course, I didn't take good care of them.
Sure.
Those cards I don't have now. Like they just got disposed of and whatnot. But I always had a really high interest in collecting those cards for fun. And I remember my cousin had like the 1990 WrestleMania cards and all that stuff. He didn't have a full set of those, but the few cards that he had of that set, we always loved those cards just the way they looked. One of the more serious card sets that I got into when I got maybe into my early teens was the 24 karat gold WWF set, which I'm not sure if you've seen those before.
Are those the like Danbury mint ones?
Yeah, I actually have the binder right here.
Yep.
Actually,
yeah. Are there cards in there? Can you open that up and? Yep.
This is not a full set.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure if anybody had seen those. Are those the wrestler nameplate underneath them?
Yeah, well, they actually have a number underneath, and they have a nameplate right here. Like this is Andre the Giant. I could probably see if I can get a little bit closer and focus the camera so you guys can see it a little bit easier.
Sure. Yep. I think people get a good idea off that.
So with these cards, back in the late 90s, my mother actually invested in buying these cards for me. The way this would work is you would actually get one card a month, one or two cards. So you would subscribe to the Danbury Mint, and they will send you one or two cards a month for like maybe $30 or $40. Now, when I was younger, my parents didn't really have a lot of money, so that's the reason why the collection had to stop at some point.
Mm-hmm.
which eventually I will actually fill that whole binder back up, and I'll track those cards down. But that was actually one set that I really loved a lot. Back in the day, I don't have the whole set. Besides that, I do have like a few of the Chromium SmackDown sets I used to collect back in the day. I don't have the whole set of those, but I have like maybe half of them. And I do have a couple of ice cream card World Wrestling Federation, and some of the later WWF ice cream cards from the ice cream sandwiches or the bars they used to have. I have actually a John Cena one, but I didn't have like a whole lot of wrestling cards back in the day. I always wanted to collect a lot of them, but now I am where I am right now. I am actually trying to collect a lot of them, just not for the value of them, but for the fun. Sure. I know a lot of people are actually selling them for the value right now. Like they're skyrocketing in price right now.
So the cards that you just showed off and some of the cards you talked about, those are your original cards from back in the day?
Those are the original ones from back in the day.
Yeah, that's always such a cool feeling. Recently I got my Hogan card from the 87 Topps signed by Hogan that I got back from him. And I've had that card since I was 4 years old.
That's amazing.
Out of everything that I've had my whole life, that's one of the few things that has like transcended time, so to speak, and I've had it forever. And I'm sure you can relate that when you have these cards, regardless of value, they may be $1 million, they may be negative. Having those things that you've had when you were growing up, it's just a really cool feeling to be able to still have those.
Yeah, it's very true. Some of those cards, like if you actually hold on to those cards all the way from back in '87, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it has a huge crease in it, but it's one of the first wrestling cards I ever remember getting. And speaking of that, you talked about growing up collecting. Did you get any backlash growing up from people around you that were like, you should be collecting baseball or you should be collecting comic books or stuff like that as opposed to wrestling? I got a lot of that. I'm just curious what happened with you.
Over in my neck in the woods, back when I was younger, I lived in Connecticut. So I would say that most of the people I went to school with were into WWF, World Wrestling Federation. So it was one of those things, like it was a McMahon territory, I would say. It was highly popular. We really didn't get that reaction over where I was, to be honest.
Interesting.
There wasn't a whole lot of people sporting cards or anything like that. It was more like magazines and stuff like that, I would say. But the cards were more of a personal thing. Definitely a lot of action figures going around being traded and stuff like that. But we never actually caught any grief or anything like that from collecting wrestling cards back then, over where I was anyways.
Even back then, the wrestling cards for you guys, was the lowest level of a collectible for wrestling?
Yeah, I would say so. So wrestling cards, it was basically a novelty to have, I would say. It wasn't like one of those things like, certain sports cards, you would definitely keep them sealed in nice, good condition. Back then, when you received wrestling cards, like for example, when I had the WWF magazine cards, they were probably being tossed around over the place, being traded with my cousin with this card, that card. They weren't being well taken care of or anything like that. Those cards were basically just a novelty for really hardcore wrestling fans, or if you were really, really into wrestling back then, having the cards was just an extra thing to have.
Right.
It wasn't something that, let's say, a rookie Michael Jordan card or something like that. It wasn't valued like that back then. It was, of course, now there's a big difference now. Like you can see cards on like eBay going for like over $100 just for one card.
Yeah, the wrestling card market, which I was going to keep collecting regardless, but it is nice to see that it kind of exploding here recently. But at the same time, you got all these big timers that don't want to recognize wrestling as being a legitimate card. It's like you said, talking about them as a novelty product, and that's what a lot of people. And it's not just wrestling. It boggles my mind. I won't get on too much of a soapbox here, but it's interesting that like the mainstream views a lot of these offshoot, not baseball, basketball, football. They will view them as novelties, but yet there's other novelty products like Justin Bieber cards that have Drake on it, or tennis cards, fringe cards like that. They'll be like, oh, well, this is legitimate cards, but wrestling, not so much. It's interesting.
No, that's very true. And Now, personally speaking, if you look at back at like Hulk Hogan or the Ultimate Warrior or Ric Flair, I would say they're just as big as Michael Jordan or any other sports icon from back in the day.
I agree.
Uh, they're just as valuable in my opinion. So I think we're seeing a huge shift in value in wrestling cards. Like there's wrestling cards now that, like for example, I just recently bought the holographic Sting
From
91
the
card.
Yep. It's a
I
great
paid
card.
over $60 for that card by itself. So
Yep.
it was nice to actually pay that much for one wrestling card, even though it came out of my own pocket. But
It's
it was nice
interesting.
to see the value of that
Interesting.
card going up.
Interesting you say that though. That like it's nice. Like it felt good to pay that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just the opposite. They're like, oh, I don't want to pay these high prices. I'm not going to stop collecting. But the fact that you're like excited to pay a higher price, I mean, it's still affordable, but a higher price, like that's kind of refreshing.
For me, it added legitimacy to my 91 WCW collection, my Impel set.
Hmm.
When I
That's a
bought
good
that
call.
card, I felt like, okay, this is the icing on the cake.
Right.
And it felt well worth it paying that much for that one card.
Interesting perspective. And speaking of that, let's jump into the next question I had, which is like, what kind of a collector are you currently? Are you going after certain wrestlers? Are you more of a set collector? Just doing it for fun, picking up whatever? Like, where are you kind of going down the avenues of collecting as far as wrestling cards go?
For me personally, I prefer to collect raw sets. If I can actually just collect the beer cards by themselves in good condition as a complete set, I will pay, in most cases, I'll definitely pay easily 75 to over $100 for a set if I have to.
Hmm.
Um, the most expensive set that I probably paid for was the 86, well, actually the 85 WWF set.
Hmm.
That one, I think I probably paid over 300 for that set, if I'm not mistaken. So, of course, the most valuable cards in that set are the two Hogan cards. But
Yeah, there for a while, you couldn't even get one of those for $300. So getting the
yeah,
whole set for 300 is not terrible.
I came across that set recently for it was a bid on eBay, so I got it for like maybe a little bit over 300 with tax.
Hmm.
I felt like it was well worth it. The cards are in pretty good shape. They're not probably not PSA grade or anything like that, of course. Just no, I don't think they would be like an 8 or a 9 or a 10 or something like that.
Well, if you're a raw set collector, who cares, right?
That's the thing. That's
Yeah.
for me. As long as the cards are not bent and there's nothing writing on them or anything like that, I personally I prefer the raw cards over PSA certified cards. Which it is also good to see PSA certified wrestling cards though.
Oh yeah,
It makes me like really happy to see that.
that's where most of the value is. There's no there's no ignoring it that graded cards is what is putting a lot of the value on these, because it's just making something that's rare and scarce in wrestling cards in general, just because the print runs aren't what sports cards are, and that's making those even more rare based on the grading. But if you're personally doing it for fun and you're not doing a lot of sales, and you don't have these big cards with goals or anything like that, like who cares? You don't need to grade stuff.
Correct. Yeah. So for me personally, I'm doing it for fun. Now, these are basically the cards that I wish I could have collected like a long time ago, but now I am collecting them. And even though they do cost quite a bit more compared to like back in the day, for me it's worth it and it's a nice hobby to have. But understandably, there is a huge increase in value on wrestling cards compared to what they were 10 or 20 years ago.
Right. So, what do you have a favorite card set or a specific card? Whether it's your favorite, maybe like you mentioned, the Sting hologram representing the icing on the cake of a set, something you've had for the longest period of time. Do you have anything like that you can speak on?
I don't necessarily have an exact favorite card, but that holographic Sting card, that would probably be hands down probably my favorite card out of any wrestling card in my opinion. Sting was back when I was younger, we didn't have TBS or TNT on our cable system, so we weren't actually able to watch WCW until like maybe Hogan joined the promotion, and then eventually our cable systems picked up all the channels required to actually see WCW Saturday Night and Main Event and all that stuff. Uh, by the time that happened, the first live wrestling event I went to in '96 was a WCW event
Hmm.
at the Hartford Civic Center, which is really obscure
Yeah.
because they didn't go to Connecticut that often because it was
Yeah.
McMahon
Right.
territory.
That's probably why you couldn't get it on cable. Like Vince probably called all the cable operators in your area and is like, "Don't you dare cover WCW. We're not going to have that in this territory."
Correct. We actually remember the name of the cable company. It was Dimension Cable, which turned into Cox Communication.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So there was no TBS on our cable system. We were actually calling to try to get TBS all the time. WCW was not on TNT yet. And I remember around 94, 95 is when we first got WCW, like able to watch it. And I loved Sting. He was a great
Right.
wrestler. And in '96, I went to the Hartford Civic Center. I saw they booked the event similar to like an old school World Wrestling Federation pay-per-view. The main event of that house show was Ric Flair versus Macho Man Randy Savage. But
Pretty good one.
mixed into the mid card of that show, like right in the middle, you had Sting teaming up with Lex Luger versus Harlem Heat.
Nice.
I believe it was Harlem Heat or it was here Chris Benoit. There was a huge card on that show, but being able to see Sting wrestle, even though it was in the middle of the card, it was like such an awesome thing. And of course, he had Macho Man and Ric Flair as the main event. Bruno Sammartino was the referee.
Oh, cool.
So it was a really, really a strange WCW house show, but it was actually pretty awesome.
Is that some? I don't know offhand. Is that something that there was any footage that ever leaked out on it from a fan cam, or did WCW have that?
I've seen one fan cam footage of the main event. There's a website called Daily Motion, similar to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only site I've ever seen exactly one match, which is the main event, the Ric Flair versus Macho Man match, featuring Bruno Sammartino in that main event as a ref. It's not the greatest fan cam footage, but it actually does exist. I actually saw it recently, and it brought back like a lot of memories.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was actually filmed somewhere up in the bleachers, and that's exactly where I was sitting at that time.
Oh, that's nice. Awesome.
So it was like from the same exact perspective of where I was actually looking from.
Man, there's nothing better than nostalgia stuff like that. Like, it's the ultimate feeling.
Yeah, exactly, man. It's a flashback from the past, and another thing about that event was it was June '96, and I believe Bash at the Beach '96 was probably maybe a month away from that, maybe a few weeks. There was a huge shift in how WCW was back then, like from prior to Bash at the Beach when Hogan turned heel, compared to like the house show I went to. It was like two completely different things.
Yep, it turned real quick.
Really, really quick. And I remember actually, my birthday's in July, so my mother would order me like probably a wrestling pay-per-view for my birthday most of the time. That year, it was Bash at the Beach '96 that I got. And I remember being 10 years old, being really, really upset that Hogan turned heel.
Yep.
He
got you.
Yeah. I was devastated. It was horrible. Oh, man.
All right. So back to that Sting card real quick. I'll just throw in my opinion because I'm kind of with you. When I look at that card, it sums up everything that is the 90s.
Yes.
That Surfer Sting, which was my favorite Sting, but I like Surfer Sting better than the Crow or what he's doing now, which is kind of still the Crow. I don't know. It's a hologram, which, come on, the 90s, we couldn't get enough holograms. We couldn't get enough gold cards. So it's the perfect aesthetic for that. And the fact that it's a chase card, that it was a case hit. You know, you couldn't pull them in packs. It was only if you ordered cases of these, and I guess it was like an incentive for dealers or something like that. But just all that wrapped together, it's such a great card.
Yeah, that card is amazing. I actually have it down here if you want to take a quick look at it.
Just in case there's somebody out here not familiar with it, if we can get a good shot on it on the camera.
Yeah, we do have that card right here. I'm pretty sure that this is the WCW binder here. So,
and while we're waiting just to kill some time, are you keeping most of your sets and binders also?
Yeah, so my sets all get put into binders, and I create like custom checklists. Just to give you an idea, this is like a custom checklist that I would create.
That looks really good.
And I would keep that right in front of that specific set and index them like by year. So I have most of the WCW sets that exist, for the exception of like the NWA cards, which, from my understanding, you actually have a full set of those.
I do. I've had them for about a year and a half.
Which that's actually pretty awesome. Those are just getting a few of those cards is pretty hard to get.
Man, there it is. Yep, that's such an awesome looking card.
And this is the Sting holographic card from '91. This is a great card right here. I'll definitely like to get close to the camera if the camera will allow me to get close to it.
Yeah, it's one of those cards where the light has to bounce off of it just right for you to see the. Which is, it's interesting that in the sports card world and UFC racing, like silver prisms are the thing. Like this is essentially a silver prism hologram.
And this card's great also because this is like probably right after he won the world championship from Ric Flair, and he's holding Big Goldie right there. I believe that's what they refer to.
Yep.
That belt right there. I actually have a replica belt of that belt. So
Nice.
This Sting card is actually hands down one of my favorite cards. It just looks great. There's like canyons in the background, and the whole backdrop of the card and this Sting himself. It just looks great. Like you said, it screams the '90s.
Yeah. Those there's those cards that just, it's almost like they're a perfect time capsule for that moment in time. And you just look at it and you're like, this is it. Like,
that's definitely one of them right there.
Yep.
I actually never knew that card even existed until like recently. I'm going to be honest, is I'm not like I really didn't get into hardcore wrestling collecting of cards until like recently. Of course, I use like a database to try to track my stuff and try to research. One thing that inspired me to recollect wrestling cards again is actually watching some of your videos.
Thank you.
I'm going to be honest, because I wanted to do a little research on these wrestling cards, and coming across your videos actually helped me figure out what I want to get.
Excellent. That's why I started the channel, because I didn't see a lot of wrestling card content out there, and I was like, you know what? If nobody's going to do this, I'm going to do it. And speaking of just starting to do stuff, another great transition. Let's talk about superstars on cards. I've had a fun time participating in this with you and Wrestle Vessel. Just talk about the project and what's going into it, kind of why you wanted to start it in the first place on a gaming channel of all things.
Well, over in my area where I live, there's a actual. This is one thing that I want to tie wrestling cards into like video games. There's actually a gaming retail store over in this area known as Game Exchange. And not only do they sell video games, but they also sell trading cards. So I figured, why not add like a small series featuring trading cards on my YouTube page? So since I started collecting wrestling cards again, I figured this is like a perfect opportunity to start a small series, like a show featuring wrestling cards. I figured that there will probably be a audience out there that might be interested in this. And to make a long story short, I shot an email to Russell Vessel. I've known him for years, going back all the way to the beginning of my YouTube channel. And then I sent you an email as well, pretty much running down like the whole format of the show and all that stuff. And basically, the whole show is showing off like a complete set of cards.
Mm-hmm.
This showing you exactly the time frame, going back in time of exactly what you're dealing with back then in professional wrestling, the aesthetics of the cards, and it's really, really, really awesome to actually go back and show an audience like these wrestling cards and get them interested in them once again.
I think going at it the way you're going at it is like you couldn't have done a better job, because it's pretty well produced, it's entertaining. You've got my part thrown in there, Russell Vessel's part in, and then you're just going over the set and talking about them. And I think for your channel, which is mainly a gaming channel, to get people introduced into wrestling cards, whether that's their subscribers to your channel or whether they're using YouTube as a search engine, it's a perfect way for them to find a set of cards and kind of get introduced to it very easily and not get bombarded with information. That way they can take that information and then start researching it if they in fact are interested in these. So what kind of feedback have you got from your subscribers or any other people that are used to putting out gaming content, but now you're doing wrestling cards?
So as far as the feedback goes, right now, since it's only been around for about a month or so, we do have a slightly smaller audience on that program, but it's growing. We do have all thumbs up, so we have a good feedback initially for the program that we're working on. We're doing a great job. The program is also featured by delay on ewrestlingnews.com.
Correct.
They actually post a full article featuring each episode on that website. And that's actually really interesting because there's not too many wrestling sites that would feature a professional wrestling trading card program. And we are all involved in it.
Right.
And that's actually a huge thing. We actually have probably 500 or 600 people watching it on their site at a time once it goes live for the first couple days. It's actually the project's turned out really well. I think I did not expect it to turn out this well, to be honest. I think it has a long ways to grow. I think after time, there's only going to be a handful of episodes here and there. Eventually, it's not going to. Let's say, of all the card sets I have, maybe 30 or 40 episodes at the most. Then eventually,
it's evergreen content, though. Like, you know, it's timeless. Like, people can watch it in 20 years from now, and it's still going to be valuable content.
That's the whole purpose of pretty much doing this series. Is I just want to make sure that people understand like how important these cards are, and giving them like a small introduction to these cards. And if they want to, of course, see a lot more detail and knowledge on these cards, then that's where your part would come in. If they go over to your channel, you have a ton of more detail and more knowledge on these cards than I do. And initially, that's the reason why I started collecting these cards again.
So we talked a little bit about, you know, your gaming channel and the gaming store that sells cards, how that's coming together. Is there any crossover between retro gaming collectors, and wrestling cards? Like, is there some crossover? What are you seeing kind of in that space?
Well, I mean, as far as trading cards in general, I think trading cards are starting to become a much bigger popular thing in more recent years compared to, I want to say, within the last 20 years. You're seeing like Pokemon cards coming back and stuff like that, big time. One of the other things that inspired me to start collecting cards again is my wife collects Animal Crossing Amiibo cards, and she has a complete set of those. Like, she has series 1 through 4, Japanese cards, and all kinds of stuff. So seeing all these video game themed cards coming back and bigger than ever, that inspired me to collect wrestling cards as well. And I dropped off for a while. Now I'm starting to get back into it like big time again. And I feel like, you know, if you go to like stores like Game Exchange over in Connecticut, they don't have any locations in New York, but they have them scattered across the country. They do sell various different trading cards in their store, whether it's wrestling cards, Pokemon cards, stuff like that. They also sell old school action figures. So if you walk into one of their stores, like the one I go to, it takes 2 hours to get there. But they have a ton of like old school action figures, like from WCW and WWF. So it's really interesting to see how like wrestling and video games tie together, and it's definitely, there's an audience there for that, and there's definitely a fan base there for that.
So we mentioned at the beginning your gaming channel. Just give us a quick background on why you wanted to start a retro gaming channel. I know the channel's been around for a while now.
All right, so my channel started probably in 2007, back when YouTube was fairly new. I always wanted to get myself involved with video editing, you know, doing that stuff, working with media and stuff like that. Back when I started my gaming channel, I really had no idea of where I was going with it, to be honest. The only other gaming channel that I remember that existed at that time was probably the Angry Video Game Nerd. It was fairly new. So I wanted to do something with a gaming channel on YouTube. That was a inspiration right there, I guess. Back in the '90s, I used to watch a program called GameSpot.
Oh yeah, yep. I'm
That was
familiar.
a video game televised program that used to air during the day. That they used to show off N64 stuff, PlayStation stuff, all that stuff. Some of you guys might actually remember that. It sounds like you might be familiar
Yep.
with that
Yeah,
program.
I used to watch periodically.
So that show actually was an inspiration to start my program also. Uh, so my YouTube channel went through hell when I first started. I try to the whole concept of my gaming Palooza Empire was to have multiple people on board doing one YouTube channel. There wasn't no one getting paid or anything like that initially
Of
at
course.
all. So there was no getting paid on YouTube back then. So I was basically doing it for fun.
Hmm.
Eventually, I went solo because things just fell apart. There's too much turmoil between certain individuals. So I probably went quite a long time, working with YouTube on my channel before eventually I got to the point where I got like a partnership and now I get paid a little bit. Um, well, mostly retro gaming. It's definitely a key aspect to me and the reason why I started the YouTube channel is back when I was younger, of course, uh, playing the old NES. I had the NES for the longest time. Because again, my family wasn't really wealthy at all. So there's kids that had the Sega Genesis or the PlayStation. I still was playing NES, to be honest. That was my getaway from the world back then.
Right.
So playing the NES or the Sega Master System. Um, there was days where I didn't want to deal with nothing and burying my face into the TV playing video games.
Yep.
It's my way of getting away from everything back then. Now that's what inspired me to pretty much create a gaming YouTube channel, and it's basically part of my life.
And I see the stack of games behind you. Where let's talk kind of the like reverse crossover with like trading cards. People like to collect them, put sets together. And then how does that go into gaming? Like are you how are you collecting games at this point, or are you just kind of buying them to play them?
Well, as far as collecting games go, I was very, very heavily into collecting games for quite a long time, and I still have certain consoles I collect for, mainly the Sega Saturn. So I still have room on my shelf for those games. As you can see behind me, there is Sega Genesis games and there's Super Nintendo games and all that stuff. I'm at that point right now where I don't really have desire to collect any more than what I have. The reason why is just I really don't have room for those.
Space. Hmm.
The space is like pretty much ran out, and it's nice to have physical media.
Right.
All these games right here, it's nice to have them, but eventually you run out of space. And I don't want to neglect them and just leave them all over the place. And that's the nice thing about collecting wrestling cards is they're much smaller. I can fit them inside of a binder, take good care of them, and I can collect a lot more of them.
Right. Yeah, that's I used to have a huge retro gaming collection and I enjoyed playing, but as I was getting into cards more, I was like, you know what, I can transition all of this space that's being taken. And the same thing with action figures because I had a ton of those. Like I can take all of these and put all that money into a smaller, single card even or just a binder or a box. And it's exactly what you said. But I still get that itch to get games. And like you said, physical media, especially VHS and cartridge based games, like it's something that is starting to get some more popularity. And I think people are kind of sleeping on that stuff as collectors' items, especially if they're sealed or complete. That's something I've recently got into is getting kind of dabbling with graded video games as a gaming channel and having your video games. What's your opinion on the graded games?
There's certain graded games that, just like wrestling cards or any sports cards, when they're graded and they're brand new in the box, or even if it's just a bare cartridge and it's in great shape, uh, they go for a lot of money. Like I've seen thousands of dollars for like one
Right.
game. And you have to be a specific gaming collector to go for something like that. And of course, you have to have a pretty good budget to actually try to go for something like that. I think it's pretty cool. So even though when a game is graded, it increases the value. It also increases the value of a raw game that's not graded.
Exactly. It's
It's
it's taken it's taken one of those out of circulation.
anytime that you see a graded video game in particular, like any game in particular being sold graded for a lot of money, more times not than often, you probably see like an article somewhere popping up about it. Now that causes the value of the actual game itself to increase in value. So I think that's actually pretty cool, and that's why I'm hoping to see with the wrestling cards as well.
Yeah, for me on the games, I used to play a lot of games, but it's a time thing. Like I just don't have the time to play a lot of video games anymore. So what kind of appealed to me on the graded aspect is again, it's all nostalgia. You know, you've got Steel Cage Challenge rolling behind you there on your TV. So
There it is.
if that is your game and you remember playing that for hours and hours and hours, having that encapsulated in a nice slab as a presentation, you may not have time to play that game and you may not have the means to play it, like you don't have the system or you don't have the emulator or anything like that. But if you have that sitting on your shelf next to all of your other collectibles, you look at it and you just remember all that awesome time you had playing that game. That's what the graded games do for me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Graded games, if you have them graded in great shape, it's definitely a nice piece to have. Just to go back out, just to take a look at it, and it's right there. It's highly valued, much like sports cards, wrestling cards. If they're graded, they're definitely a treasure to have.
Right.
Highly important. So if I personally don't have any graded cards or anything like that yet, but never say never because I actually might try to explore that in the future. But I've seen wrestling cards graded that have on eBay that have gone for quite a few thousands of dollars,
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's getting nuts.
which is it's pretty wild to see just one card going for that price. And the same with gaming cartridges and stuff. It's
Hmm.
pretty wild to actually see like one game going for that price as well.
Well, I've had a great time talking to you today. We've covered a lot of ground. I love crossover talk. Like, if we can bring people that are into one hobby into wrestling cards, or people that are wrestling cards fans into something else, it always makes me happy because I like to collect a variety of things, and even things I'm not as like. I'm a fan of retro games. I don't play as much, but I know quite a bit about them, and I'm a fan. But there's even things out there that I'm not as big a fan of, and I still like to talk about them and get into the mindset of the people who do collect that stuff because I think it's just fun to have a variety. So I'm hoping that this video and the information that you've given today has really helped people kind of learn different ways of collecting, a little bit about video games, crossover. So as we're leaving, let everybody know where they can find your channel. Anything else you want to plug, just go ahead.
My channel is known as the Gaming Palooza Empire on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to check out the Superstars on Cards episodes featuring Zhan Morning, the Russell Vessel, and myself, Joe Reynolds, also known as the Aftershock. That's basically my tag. Just as a bonus, would you guys like to see some of my highly valued video games? Because I have probably a couple
Yes.
that are quite treasured. So,
Yes, let's do it.
all right, let's do that before we go.
Yep.
I actually have one that's right behind me. Let's see. I'm going to grab one that's over there. Actually, there's an NES game that I have that's valued highly. Let's be one moment here.
Sure.
I'm going to show off two games, and then we'll call it a day. So right here we have an Earthbound for the NES, the original cartridge
Yep.
right here. This game is one of the higher valued Super Nintendo games. I also have the strategy guide for this game as well. I don't have the box or anything like that, but if you guys are into game collecting, this is definitely one of the higher valued RPGs available for the Super Nintendo. The current price value, I honestly don't know because I haven't looked in a while, but I do know that it can go easily over a couple $100 just for one game.
It's interesting too that when I was a kid, my video rental store had that game, and it just sat on the shelves for like nobody in my area was
Yeah,
renting it. And to see it now that that's we've
it's
seen the
one of
same
those
thing.
games that wasn't exactly that popular back in the day, but all of a sudden now it's like
Yeah.
it's rare, and the price point is like way up there for that game. This game is for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's Snow Brothers.
Oh yeah.
Now, Snow Brothers, it's like an arcade style game. It's one of those games that, for whatever reason, it keeps going up and up in value. It's probably worth $200 or $300 just for one cartridge, even bare by itself, just like this. And then we do have the manual for it right here. So those are like two treasures that I have. I do have more, of course, but we'll keep it at that. Two common games that you probably are familiar with from back in the day that currently go for quite a bit of money for some reason. They're just highly valued. And much like wrestling cards, you're going to see the value on those cards, various different cards, go up in price quite a bit in the future.
I agree. Yeah. I think people are sleeping on a lot of the video games right now. So thanks for coming on. And everybody make sure to head over to his channel. The link will be in the show notes, so you can go directly to the channel. Please subscribe. And Joseph, thanks for joining us.
Have a great day, guys.
Thanks again to Joseph for joining me today. Make sure to go to his channel, the Gaming Palooza Empire, and hit that subscribe button. And while you're on his channel, watch some video game content, but don't forget to check out the wrestling card series that I'm helping with, Superstars on Cards. Links to Joseph's channel in the show notes. And if you want more great wrestling card content, click the videos on the screen, and we'll see you there.